Welcome to the Family Life Blended podcast. I'm Ron Deal. We help blended families and those who love them pursue the relationships that matter most. And why do we do that? Well, because just like the biblical characters, we need reminders of how to stay on track following the King. There are so many distractions in life, and we so want to be our own gods, right? We need to remind ourselves of who is the King and who is not. And that little introduction, by the way, is a little bit of a hint into our subject today. Stay with me. I think you're going to enjoy it. If you're relatively new to our listening community, this is episode number 168, which means you've got some catching up to do. Don't forget to scroll back through our previous episodes. They cover a host of topics related to healthy stepfamily living. I'm sure something will be helpful to you. For example, we heard from someone in Edmonton, Alberta, saying, "Thank you so much for tackling the topic on step-parenting and how it impacts a blended family marriage." That was episode number 146. We also heard from Madeline watching on YouTube, who said she got some awesome insights from episode number 157 about step-family ministry in Black and Brown church communities. See what I'm talking about? There's something in our archives that will be relevant to your family. And yes, if you didn't know, you can subscribe to the video version of this podcast. It's on YouTube, or you can continue to listen to the audio version on your podcast app, whichever you prefer. We are gearing up for our next summit on step-family ministry. It's coming this October. It's going to be in the Nashville, Tennessee area. This is a 2-day in-person event that equips leaders for local blended family ministry. And you get connected to leading thinkers, authors, and practitioners of step-family ministry. I hope you will come and join us. And yes, along with my guest today, Laura Petherbridge, she is going to be with us for the Summit on Step-Family Ministry, talking about some themes related to her new book that we're going to be discussing here in just a little bit. So visit summitonstepfamilies.com. Let me say that again, summitonstepfamilies.com for more information. There's a link in the show notes. We want you to learn all about it. And if you can't attend, tell somebody in your church. We would love to have them join us. So my guest today is Laura Petherbridge. She's an internationally known speaker and author of 4 books, including When I Do Becomes I Don't, 101 Tips for the Smart Stepmom, and Quiet Moments for the Stepmom's Soul. Her 4th book, she and I got acquainted writing it together. We wrote The Smart Stepmom together. Since then, she has spoken for Family Life Blended many times. Her latest book is what we're going to be talking about today. I'm very excited about this. It's called Stepfamilies of the Bible, Timeless Wisdom for Blended Families. Laura, welcome back to Family Life Blended.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm glad to be here.
It's good to see you again.
You too.
I've been really excited about this project. As you know, I wrote the foreword for the book and endorsed it because I believe it has so much value for blended families and for the Christian community at large. But I got to ask you, why did you set out to tackle this subject?
Well, do you want the real answer? Or
Yes, we always want the real answer.
I know the answer I'm supposed to give, but to be honest with you, God would not leave me alone. I got the idea for this, or he gave me the idea for this, and I'm not a person that says that all the time. God told me to do this. So, this was years ago. I'm thinking like 6 years ago. And so I really started writing it back then, and I do a couple of chapters, and it was so different than anything I had done before. I'm like, this is too hard. I don't really want to do this. So I'd stop doing it, and I'd test the waters a little more over here. And so, every time I would pray, okay, God, what project do you want me to work on next? I knew the Holy Spirit was just saying to me, you haven't finished what I gave you last time.
Well, you emailed me a number of times through this process, and I remember you floating the idea, and I was like, oh, yes, I think that would be a fabulous thing. And then I remember hearing from you, 6 months, 9 months later, something like, yeah, okay, what do you think of this? And I could tell that, you were wrestling through it all, but I knew your heart was in it.
Yes. Well, last year, I went through a little, not a crisis of faith, but I went through a little growth spurt,
Hmm.
a spiritual growth spurt. And I really all of a sudden just became, you've got to focus on this and finish it. And
Hmm.
so,
Hmm.
and I had probably 30,000 words written at that point, and the book is 55,000 words. So it's not like but I was dancing all over the place. I
Yeah.
talk about this family, then I talk about, I could not rein my thoughts in. And so after that kind of little epiphany, I was much more focused, and I just refused to allow myself to write anything, to think about anything else in the ministry focus other
Hmm.
than the book. And
Hmm.
that's when it finally came together.
Well, I'm glad you did. I'm glad you buckled down. It's a really, really good read. And I'm going to talk about the elephant in the room. Somebody heard me introduce step families in the Bible. Are there step families in the Bible? Yes, there are. And it's so amazing to me. I've been talking about this for a long time. As you and I did that in our book, The Smart Stepmom.
Yep.
I have a whole chapter in the Smart Step family that walks through the craziness of some of those Old Testament families, not to the depth that you have done. I've been talking about this a long time, and it still continues to amaze me, Laura. And I'm wondering if you get this when you go and speak different places. I'm continually amazed at how lifelong Christians have never given this a thought. Jesus had a stepfather. I will say that to an audience who have been in the church their entire lives, 50, 60, 70 years, and people look at you go, oh, yeah, he did. Like they've never had this thought before. And then you go, yeah, and most of the Old Testament families were complex families in one way or another, mirroring a lot of the complexity that we have in modern day families in our world. And it's as if people and pastors have never heard this ever in their lives. And I'm sort of like, how is it that we've avoided this reality in how we do life and ministry?
It is 100% true. I just had two women who are not in a step family, but they have friends in a step family, and one has a son or a daughter in a step family. And they're like, I never thought of it this way before.
Huh.
You're absolutely right. There are step families in the Bible. So
Yeah.
I get that constantly. I completely agree with you and have experienced the same thing. I even had, I've been advertising the book. I have people go, what a unique idea. And
you
I
know,
just think we don't think of it that way.
Yeah. They are families of a different shape and color, if you will. So you have men with multiple wives. So that's different than a divorce and a second marriage or being widowed and getting married again and later in life or what. So there are uniquenesses to the elements, but the dynamics when you get inside the inner workings of those families, they look just like modern day blended families that we are dealing with every single day. Okay, we're going to drill down. I'm promising the listener or the viewer, we're going to drill into some of the specifics in this book and some of these biblical families because there's some great takeaways. But first, I wanted to ask you, Laura. So after having, gone through this process of writing about all these families and taking a long, long, hard look, were there any takeaways for you? For you personally, for you and your relationships, or maybe just you as you think about the modern day families, were there any big takeaways?
I was actually pretty surprised at how many moments I had of aha.
Mm,
Again, because I've been a stepmom now for 39 years. Last December was 39 years Steve and
mm,
I have been married. My stepsons were 11 and 13 when we got married,
wow.
and they're, in their 50s with kids of their own now. So I didn't think there was a whole lot more to learn.
Yeah.
And so I had some very profound aha moments. Of course, the first few were, Sarah and Hagar was so obvious.
Mm-hmm.
That was probably the first inspiration that I got to do this, because these two women, you could pluck them out of thousands of years ago and drop them in a reality TV show today and label it, step family war of the women,
Yeah.
and it would look just like your neighbor,
Right.
because their disdain for each other is
Yes.
very profound, and the reasons that they hate each other are very similar to today. So that was the thing that didn't surprise me, is sort
Okay.
of that. But as many times as I've read the story of Joseph and him forgiving his brothers, it was a whole new awakening. I think that he and Benjamin are what we would call maybe today the hours baby,
Yes.
because,
Born to the new couple's relationship. That's what an hours
yes,
baby is.
and the wife that he really loved, that he
Right.
always wanted.
And
And
so that's who Joseph and Benjamin were born to. And we're going to get into the nitty gritty. If you're not familiar with these stories, we're going to wrap back here in a minute and unpack that so you can really understand the context. But what I hear you saying, Laura, is that there was something about that dynamic that struck you.
yes, viewing Joseph and Benjamin as the hours baby for the first time, I had never
Hmm.
thought of it that way before. And how in my life coaching, I help couples that have an hours baby, and how the dynamics of that so paralleled
Hmm.
to the today. Again,
Yeah.
it's like scripture, when scripture says there's nothing new under the sun,
Hmm.
that our human nature is our human nature, whether it happened back then or it happened now. So I relived Joseph's forgiveness
Hmm.
in a whole new way. Not only for step family situations, but biological family situations that have been painful in my life. So I would say Joseph really came forward, and also Jesus and his half brothers and sisters.
Hmm.
That was, and some people don't believe Jesus had half brothers and sisters, so that's a
Correct.
little prickly. But
Hmm.
I mean, if you read scripture, it's pretty clear that he did. And so how they treated him before he was resurrected.
Hmm. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's big.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. All right. We're getting a little ahead of ourselves. I really want us to dig into some of these stories. In the foreword, I said something about, I don't remember exactly everything I said. It's been a minute. But one of the things I said is that biblical families and studying biblical families, one of the things you learn from reading the story of the families in the Bible is that family structure does not determine our worth or our value to God or his ability to use us. It's what comes from inside a man, is what Jesus would say in Mark chapter 7. That determines sin or righteousness, not what begins outside of him. And all of the central qualities that build godliness and contribute to healthy relationships flow from the heart, not necessarily the structure of our family. I think that's important for us to just say up front, because if there's one meta message I would love for people to get from reading the Old Testament, it's that if you're feeling a little imperfect today, and who doesn't, right? If we take an honest appraisal of our life, who doesn't feel a little imperfect? I know I do. If you're feeling that and you think, man, I can't be loved by God, I can't be acceptable to God, I certainly can't be, in his kingdom doing good things and representing him given the imperfection of my own life, then you haven't read the Old Testament families. Like, you should just pause and go, nope, that's never been the story. That's never been the case. God uses these people in spite of their imperfections, just like he does with you and I. How
Mhm.
would you react to that?
100% true. It's kind of astounding when you read stories like King David, of man after God's own heart,
Mm,
and he's got a big step family.
yep.
I could You could do
Big,
a whole book.
complicated, and a mess. Yes, you could have written a whole book on that one. Yeah.
um and 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 yet he's still called the man after God's own heart, and
Mm-hmm.
the line of Jesus comes from him.
Mm-hmm.
And so if nothing else, it should teach us that God uses the sin done by us and the sin done to us for his
Mm,
glory if we let him. And that can include wherever you are in the divorce and remarriage process. You may be hearing this today, and you may be the person that damaged your first marriage, and you're wondering, well, does any of this apply to me?
mm,
Well, divorce does not nullify the cross.
That's
The
right.
blood of Jesus is more powerful than any sin I have committed in the past. That
That's right.
doesn't mean we're supposed to be soft on divorce. That's not what I'm saying. But
Mm-mm.
I meet so many people that feel they can't come. They can't come to Christ. They can't come to church because they're divorced or they've been
Mm.
divorced and maybe they
Yeah.
were the reason they got divorced. Well, let's look at these families, many of which made huge mistakes and created their own chaos out of their own sin, and yet God used them after
That's
they
right.
repented, turned around, and he brings forth from their seed, from their family, godliness.
Much of the Old Testament, for people who don't know, is a genealogy. We're just following a particular line of people because we need to get to the King, Messiah.
Yes.
We have to get to
Yes.
Jesus. And so these are the people that make up his family lineage. And that's why we follow those people instead of somebody across the street or across the planet. If you ever wonder, why do we get these stories? That's it, because it's all about leading to the Messiah. And so that's the point you made a minute ago. These are the people that Jesus comes from, right? Again, God is not limited by our imperfections. If he was, Jesus would have been in trouble.
Yes.
I mean, there's good news wrapped up in these stories all over the place. Okay, let's press in. You've already talked a little bit about Hagar and Sarah, so let's just start with Abraham. What are there any particular lessons we can learn about jealousy and resentment from Abraham, Sarah, and Hagar, and set the stage a little bit for that dynamic?
Well, there's usually a villain and a hero when we talk about a story. But actually, both of these women were equally wrong. They equally, I mean, I get them. I get why they do what they do because I've lived in both of those circumstances. But they really are just so hateful of each other that their claws come out and we see the worst. We see the worst of what they are.
Okay, let me set the stage for people. So Abraham, God comes to him and says, hey, through your seed, he doesn't have any children at this point in time, but through your seed, the whole world is going to be blessed. He creates a covenant relationship with Abraham, and he basically says, not only are you going to have kids, you're going to have kids that impact the entire world and everybody in the world. And ultimately, that's through Jesus. But Abraham's going, yeah, okay, me and Sarah, we're not having kids so far. Eventually, they're going to have a child. But before that happens, Sarah has this bright idea to bring alongside a maidservant, which was a customary, common in those days. We can have a conversation about why that happened. But she basically brings another woman into their marriage, Hagar, and says, I can't seem to get pregnant, but she can. She'll have the baby. I'll get to name it. This will be the promised child that God has given us. Not so. She's taken measures into her own hands and creating this whole different family dynamic. Okay, so that's the stage. So what basically happens then between the two women?
Well, they grow to hate each other because once Sarah sees the baby that her husband has had with this other woman, and it just stirs her jealousy. It just
Mm-hmm.
makes her madder. It doesn't ease the problem like she thought it was going to. It just makes her infuriated now that
Yeah.
this woman has given her husband the thing she desires most in life. And we have to remember, back in that day, a woman had no value if she did not have children. That was her whole purpose. That was her whole significance, was to give her husband children, preferably sons.
Mm-hmm.
And so that this woman can give her husband the very thing she longs for most in the whole world, instead of it bringing joy and happiness into their life, she grows to not only resent the maidservant, Hagar, she hates the kid.
Mm.
And, when at some point she sees Ishmael, that's the son, taunting in the future, when she does have a child, she sees the stepson, we would call it today,
Mm-hmm.
taunting her own son Well, that's when she tells Abraham, you got to get rid of this woman. You got to
Hmm.
kick her out of here and her son too.
I
And
remember
so,
that, and her son. Listen to that language. I've always noticed that. She says to Abraham, this is about his son, Ishmael, but she says that woman and her son. She's trying to marginalize her husband from his child.
yes. And how common is that, Ron?
That's right. And what result did that get her? But nothing but more trouble, right? And the same thing happens today.
Yes.
The minute you try to build a wedge between a parent and their child, you're the one who gets pushed aside, I think.
And yet, what I hope people see in the shining story of this is that while Hagar has been kicked to the curb, now we got to remember this woman is not one of the holy. She's not from a holy family. She's not an Israelite.
Mm-hmm.
She's out in the desert with her son, thinking she's going to die, and who comes to her but the living God?
Mm-hmm.
And she's an outcast. She's not even part of the circle of who God's supposed to be loving on and reaching. And he reaches out to Hagar and says, I see you. I see you, Hagar. Don't be discouraged. And so what I just love that piece, because I can sometimes be like Hagar, especially as a stepmom.
Mm-hmm.
I can sometimes be the one that's like, you're being a witch over there. I don't want to deal with you. And yet God comes to me, Laura, I see you. I see your
Yeah.
pain. I see
Yeah.
why this is causing you pain and stress. But don't go in that direction, honey. Turn around. Turn around. Come back home. And so, even though in the midst of all this hate and strife and resentment with each other, God shows up right in the middle of it.
Hmm.
Beautiful.
It is beautiful. That is beautiful. It's one of those shining grace moments in the midst of all these difficulties. And in that, the story over and over again, God showing up in gracefulness to us when we're in jealousy and resentment, trying to position ourselves so that we win. What's the takeaway there for a modern day mom, stepmom, who finds themselves trying to win the battle between they and the other woman, if you will, the other household, and they're trying to make them look bad so that I look good. They're trying to position me so I'm closer to this person or that person and you're more distant. What's the takeaway for them?
Of all the things that I've learned while working in step family ministry, the hatred between the mom and the stepmom is probably the most toxic of it all.
Hmm.
And you do not see this with dad and stepdads nearly as much. There's something about women that are more, and I love women. I mean, I work with women. I praise women. So I'm not bashing on women. I'm just saying that you don't see a dad and a stepdad, going over to the neighbor. Hey, did you see how short his shorts were when he
Mm.
came over to pick up the kids?
Yeah.
You don't see that
Yeah.
scrutiny or that bashing. I'm not saying
Mm-hmm.
they always get along, or the dad and the stepdad don't sometimes have, but it's not a cat fight usually.
Mm-hmm.
That normally occurs between the mom and the stepmom, and they often have good reasons for being so angry and upset with each other. Sometimes the stepmom is stepping out of her role, out of her lane, and trying to take over the mother spot. And the mom is going to, I mean, that's where the phrase mother bear comes from. I mean,
Yeah.
there's an
Right.
instinct in a mother that's going to do that. So the takeaway, I think, and the lesson we can learn is, have I learned my role as the step parent?
Hmm.
Am I throwing gasoline on the fire as the mom or the stepmom? Am I respecting that other woman's role in the home? And have I tried to be a peacemaker?
Hmm.
Not a peaceaholic, not
Hmm.
addicted to making everybody happy, but have I tried to be like Christ? Have I prayed for the mind of Christ so that I'm thinking like Jesus would in the midst of this chaos?
Hmm.
And Hagar and Sarah are a very good example of what not to do. And we can't forget Abraham here either, because he should have spoken up, in my opinion, if God was
Hmm.
asking me. He should have spoken up a little bit to maybe his wife and said, hey, God promised this.
Yeah.
No, I'm not going to sleep with her. I'm
Yeah.
not going to do it because God said we're going to have kids. I don't know how he's going to do that, but I don't know if that would have been proper in that day. I don't know. I don't know the theology well enough but there is a little piece of me that wants
Yeah.
Abraham to stand up and say no.
No, I
Um,
absolutely think you're right about that. And it does speak to, it seems to me as I'm processing this, both Abraham and Sarah both took easy over hard. And hard is when we trust God with stuff we can't see working out. We
yes.
can't see, living with integrity somehow being to our advantage. So we've got to resort to control and manipulation to get what we want. And that's easy.
Yep.
And so they both said yes to easy. Sarah said, yes, I'll suggest this. Abraham said, yeah, I'll take you up on that. That was, neither one of them should have gone down that road. And they both did. And of course,
Yes.
that just added to the whole situation. And later, Abraham still seemed to be indecisive about standing up for things that were right. He seemed to be one of those peace at all cost persons you were talking about. And of course, that just led to more anger and bitterness between the women in this scenario.
Yes. And women, when it comes to children and when it comes to the home, this is going to be where you're going to get women really clawing each other their eyes out,
Hmm.
because this is what where a woman feels safe and validated. Her nest, her home is
Hmm.
her safe place. That's where her greatest fear is abandonment, where a man's greatest fear is failure. And so when she's not feeling loved and appreciated and seen, I think that's why when God came to Hagar, he said, I'm the El Roy, the God who
Hmm.
sees you.
Hmm.
Very often, the reason why stepmoms and biological moms will come to me for coaching, they don't feel seen. They don't feel anybody gets it. Not their
Yeah.
family, not their
Yeah.
ladies at church, not their husband. They don't feel anybody gets what they're going through. And so often, all we need is just to say, I see you. I see
Hmm.
what you're going through. The way you're
Hmm.
handling it might not be the best.
Yeah.
So I think the answer to that is that women deal with this in a different way. They have different emotions about it than, say, a dad and a stepdad would.
Yeah.
And Sarah and Hagar give us a good snapshot.
That's a good example. Okay, let's move on to another family. A guy named Jacob. He's going to end up with 4 wives when it's all said and done. If 2 was hard, 4 is going to be really difficult. And without going into all the details of the story, I'll just say he really only wanted one of them. He only wanted one of them. And, he finally gets to marry her, but the other 3 start having children. And then the one that he really loves finally has a child, and his name is Joseph. And in the meantime, there's all these other brothers that have already been born into a family where their moms are not chosen and they're not really loved by their dad, and sets up this huge environment where Joseph is going to ultimately be rejected by his brothers. Okay, where do we start with that one?
There are so many step family dynamics in that story. It probably covers almost every emotion
Hmm.
that can be in a step family. But Joseph and Benjamin are, again, what today we would call the ours baby. And because it's with the wife he loves, the wife he really wants to be with, the one he had wanted from the very beginning, and the one he feels now is his soulmate,
Hmm.
to use a modern day phrase. And so the 2 children that come from that relationship, it's obvious that the dad is more favored. He favors them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And very often kids, when their dad, especially dad, get remarried, they view themselves, I'm now outside the circle.
Hmm.
You've created a new family with your new wife and the children you're having with her, and I'm now on the outside,
Mm. Oh,
and
Laura,
I don't feel like I belong.
I got to stop you right there because you just hit on something that is absolutely a dynamic. If somebody's listening right now, if you're that dad and, for whatever reason, marriage one came apart, whether you or they, your ex wife, whatever the story is, it came apart. And now you have a second wife and you have really marginalized your children from the first marriage. You have got to get reconnected into their heart and in their life. If you just sort of set up camp and start life number two without them, that is a massive, massive trauma in their world. And it is not right. You've got to get reconnected there. If you're that second wife and you're listening, you're going, well, I don't want my husband to spend his, well, that's your desperation and isolation and control kicking in there. Those kids need their father. You're absolutely right. That's what Jacob essentially does. And so, of course, it's going to ripple into rivalry between all these half brothers, step brothers, essentially. And that's what happens to the point
Yes.
where they ultimately decide they want to get rid of the favorite child, Joseph. They want to kill
Yes.
him. They decide to sell him into slavery and send him away and lie to dad and tell him he's dead. I mean, when you hear that story fresh, you go, wow,
Yeah.
how manipulative, how much pain is coming out of those other children as exemplified by what they do to their brother and what the lie they tell their dad.
Yes. People hate hearing this. They
Mm-hmm.
just hate hearing it. And I get it. I understand why, especially the stepmom. I understand why she struggles because this child that she's had with her husband, who has children from a previous relationship, either marriage or fiance or relationship, she wants her child to be the focus.
Mm-hmm.
She wants their child together to be the focus. And, Ron, I have a half brother. So I understand this more closely than maybe somebody who doesn't. I have two stepbrothers. I have a biological brother, two stepbrothers, and one half brother. My dad remarried two more times.
Mm-hmm.
And so I can say, with all honesty, when my dad had the Hours baby with his second wife, who is my half brother, and I saw how happy he was with that baby, because by now I'm a teenager.
Mm-hmm.
And my dad was more mature and more settled by that point. My parents got married very young. And so I'm watching him with this half brother whom I liked. I mean, I thought he was cute. I thought he was fun. I was 18, almost 18 at the time. But there was something, that child brought my dad a joy
Mm-hmm.
that was hard for me to embrace.
We all want to have our parents delight in us.
Yes.
We all want to be that apple in their eye. And when we see that affection going somewhere else, it just makes us jealous.
Yep.
Hmm.
And he loved this baby. My brother was very, very smart, and so he was always, my dad just would laugh. He would throw his head back and laugh and laugh. And there was this piece of me that was like, I wish I could make my daddy laugh like that now. And
Mm-hmm.
so it wasn't so much I didn't hate my half brother, and I didn't wish he wasn't there or any of that. So there's this piece of me that gets Joseph and his brothers and his, I can understand the jealousy. Um, I would never have done anything to harm my half brother,
Mm-hmm.
but you kind of have to live this to
Yeah.
get it.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
And to understand what that feeling is like, that this new child is getting your parent.
Hmm.
And, even my stepbrothers got my dad 24/7 because their bio dad was not in their life. and my dad, adopted them legally. So they got my dad 24/7. I got him every other weekend.
Hmm.
And
I
after he got remarried, his wife always wanted us to do everything all together, the Brady Bunch. And so there was jealousy that I never got any alone time with my dad. So that's in this circumstance, that's what I encourage dads to do.
yeah.
Please make sure you are spending one-on-one time with the children from your first marriage.
Jealousy is the fear of being replaced. And if you see somebody else moving into that place of delight in your daddy's heart, for example, then all of a sudden you feel like, have I been moved out of that? Where's my place? What role or significance do I play in that? And the next thing you're vying to squeeze your way in or push somebody out or something. That's where it takes us if we don't manage it well. And that's absolutely this story. It's so interesting as you're talking. I'm going, yeah. And how do we teach the story of Joseph to little kids at church? And how do we preach about it? Well, we talk about this great guy who comes out of this hard life, and he rises above, and he paves the way, and he basically, because of how God uses him and blesses him, he makes a way for the Israelites to be rescued one day. And then there's this great story of forgiveness with he and his brothers. And I'd love for you to talk about that in a minute. But we sort of capitalize on the great elements, the high points of this story, and we just ignore all this pain and difficulty and family infighting that's going on behind the scenes.
We do. Usually when you hear teaching on Joseph, it's about the forgiveness. It's the forgiveness is the shining crescendo of the story.
Yeah.
I love the part that and again, I had read the story of Joseph and studied it many times, but while writing this book, when it describes Joseph crying when his brothers come and he recognizes them, but they don't recognize him. Mm-hmm. Obviously, he's speaking a different language now, but he can understand what they're saying because that's his native tongue. But they think he can't understand it. And so while he goes off by himself, they think he's mad. They think the king, oh, jeepers, the king's probably going to chop off our head, or, the Pharaoh's, he's going to chop off our head. He's in the other room, and it says that he cried so hard that he was wailing so hard that the servants could hear him and were concerned about him. And as many times as I've read that story, it never hit me like it did while I was writing this book. That Joseph is grieving, that guttural cry in his gut. These are my brothers. This is my family. And it's you got to know he's reliving what they did to him, and then coming now to this place where he has the power within his hands to bless them or kill them.
Yep. And of course he uses it, if you're not familiar with the story, he uses it for blessing. And by the way, their paranoia lives on and on and on. Later in Genesis, when Jacob, their father, finally dies, they think, okay, now Joseph's finally going to get revenge on us. Like, they lived with a ton of guilt over what they did to him for years and years and years, and it was only his loving persistence and forgiveness that ever even made it possible for them to sort of come back together again.
Yes.
Which is a good story. I mean, that is a shining star that we can all take away. We've all had somebody do something in jealousy or resentment or whatever toward us that's caused some pain and difficulty. And forgiveness is the path. It is the thing that we can do. It is the power that we have to deal with those great hurts and disappointments.
It is. And I love that Joseph was so eager to see his biological brother. The only one that is his full brother is Benjamin. And, he's one of the conditions before they know who he is I want you to bring Benjamin back with you the next time. And of course, the dad doesn't want to do that. He's afraid Benjamin's going to get killed. But yet how Jacob says, well, I lost Joseph. Now you want me to give up my other favorite son? Like, oh my gosh, Jacob, stop already.
Yeah, stop. You're adding insult to injury with your other children.
Like, this is why we're in this position. Could you please
Yeah.
stop saying stuff like that?
Exactly.
Yeah. Very,
Wow.
very relative.
Absolutely. Okay, we're going to jump to the story of David, who, again, here's a character. What did you learn in Sunday school about David? Oh, he killed a lion. He killed Goliath. He, God saw him as a humble servant, so he made him king, and he couldn't wear the armor because he was too small, but he's such a super nice guy. Great. And he writes, half of the Psalms that we, he's a brilliant poet and lyricist, writing music. And he's one of the greatest kings, and everybody's going to talk about him forever and a day, even up to the time of Jesus. Is there other stuff about his life that I don't know? Didn't he kill a guy to steal his wife because he got her pregnant, but that's it. He just had 2 wives, right? What's the answer,
The list
Laura?
is long.
Oh, really? If somebody doesn't know, tell them. How many did he have that we know of?
I don't have that in front of me. There's so many.
I want to say it was 17, and I think I learned that from your book. So
Okay.
17 wives. Yeah, kings had all kinds of wives. They did all kinds of stuff. But
Now, I only focus on a handful of the wives.
Yeah, right, because who can write all that? But the point is, there was all kinds of things. He was an incredibly humble man and follower of Jesus. Not of Jesus, of God.
Yeah.
But there came a moment in his life where he sort of lost his sensibilities and started enjoying being king, if I could say it that way, and made lots of decisions that were not helpful. Had a son who replicated dad's sexual disgrace by raping a half-sister. And then and David does nothing. He doesn't say anything. He doesn't correct his son. He doesn't call him on the carpet, into account for any of that. And so it's just sort of more and more stuff kept rippling out throughout that complex family system. What reflections do you have from reading through and writing about that story?
My prayer is that reading about David as a father and the good, the bad, and the ugly of that will help dads, because dads really struggle often in step families. And Ron, you and I you taught me a lot when we were writing The Smart Stepmom about how men could feel emasculated in that. I never really understood any of that until we wrote The Smart Stepmom. And it helped me to understand how when men feel emasculated in the step family situation, or if I make my ex-wife happy, my current wife's going to be mad. If I make my current wife happy, my ex-wife's going to be mad. And I just want peace because I want my kids to come over.
Right.
So the poor guy very often feels very caught in the middle. And when men don't know what to do, they often do nothing.
They retreat into isolation and
Yes.
withdraw often. Yep.
Yep.
Not all the time, but
Yeah,
that's a
right.
common dynamic.
Yes. And the number one thing stepmoms say to me is, my husband refuses to parent his children. That is the number one thing they say to me, is he refuses to set boundaries. He refuses to say no. He refuses all of this stuff. And so David's life, if we'll let it, can be a really great illustration of the do's and don'ts as a dad. And what you described about him not allowing a consequence for his son who raped Tamar, his daughter, it's like he glossed over. It says he was angry. Well, whoop-de-doo, he was angry.
Yeah.
In that day, it ruined her life.
Yeah.
Like a woman that wasn't a virgin, here she was, daughter of the king. She could have had her pick of anybody as a husband. So she never gets remarried. She never has children. And he could have forced the son to marry Tamar. That was, she even says to her brother, make a promise to me, make me a valid woman by marrying me now that you've raped.
Today we would say, make her an honest woman.
Yes,
Something
exactly.
like that. Yeah.
And instead, she
none
goes
of that
into isolation.
Yes. Wow.
Yes.
Are
And
there other do's and don'ts that stand out to you about David?
well, he sometimes isn't very nice to his wives.
Mm, okay.
We
Don't
don't,
do that.
yeah, I mean, we don't see tons of understanding of that. And again, the culture was so different. He does appear to treat Bathsheba very well after their marriage, after the whole debacle with, the murder, and then
Mm-hmm.
she loses the baby she's pregnant with, the baby
Mm-hmm.
dies as a
Mm-hmm.
consequence to their sin. And you see him the most compassionate, I believe, with that wife. You also see him be very wise with Abigail, one of the wives that he gets after he goes and conquers an area. And Abigail is the wife of the man from that land, and the husband is a jerk. And so he ends up dying, and David goes back and recognizes that Abigail is this amazing woman. And so he makes her a queen. He makes her another wife, and he seems to validate her really well.
Mm.
So we do see some glimpses of how a husband can honor a wife, even in these very weird circumstances. Towards the end of his life, he really listens to Bathsheba about some
Mm.
of the dynamics. But the main takeaway from David and his children are, you got to pay more attention. It's what you
Mm.
were saying earlier. You've got to be there and be present and be active in the lives of these kids. Don't be so busy working and doing your manly stuff, your job stuff, that your kids, no matter which marriage they're from, are falling through the cracks.
Hmm. We
So
are
that's a big takeaway from David's life.
uh, we all, dads and moms, are so important to their kids. It's just I've sat with a lot of men, Laura, who have said, my ex-wife got remarried and he's good to my children, and it just seems like it'd be easier on my kids if I just didn't show up very often, or I just kind of faded into the no, 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 no. I don't care if they're adults. I don't care what age they are, what's happened in the past. There is only one you. And when you show up, you bring something. You teach something. You instill in them a sense of who they are and their identity, and that they're worthy of being loved. Like, all of that is so soul deep that it just doesn't happen if you're not even showing up.
It's so hard to convince the guys because they do. I hear that same thing. It's like, well, they don't call me anymore. They don't come over. They
Yeah.
expect the child to pursue them.
Yeah. Nope.
And if the child is feeling pushed to the outside, they're not going to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And
Exactly.
yeah, I mean, and it's easier to just say, "Oh, I don't need my dad anyway." And if mom, biological mom, is in the other home saying your dad's a loser, he doesn't care,
Right.
it- what by him stepping back or stepping out, that's just confirming that what she's saying is true.
It's loading her gun with ammunition. That's all it's doing.
Absolutely. And like you just said, I don't care if it's been 5 years since you felt like it would be better to just step away. And I hear a lot of dads, and even my own dad did this, that, well, if
Mm.
they're not coming over, I don't want to force them. If they don't, he gets his feelings hurt. Well, if they don't want to be here, I'm not going to make them be here. You need
Right.
to go find out why they don't want to be there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
You want them to be there. That's the point. You let your desire for your children be known to your children.
yes.
And if you don't persist in expressing that and demanding that and showing and articulating that, then they quickly become of the opinion that you really don't have much desire. We should fully expect kids to at some point say, no, I don't really want to hang out with my mom and dad. They're losers. We should fully embrace that that's going to happen from everybody's child to every parent in the universe. That doesn't stop your desire for them. And at the end of the day, that's what they're wanting to hear and feel anyway. I got
Yes.
to ask you, Laura, about Bathsheba for a second. You talked about her, and I'm so glad David got better towards her.
Yeah.
I,
Yes.
I just want to point out there's a number of scholars who really think the situation with the Bathsheba was not an affair, that it was the king taking a woman and essentially having his way with her, and she didn't have a choice. It was a Me Too moment in history. And I just want to say that. I don't know that I can say definitively which it was. I just think we give him a pass when we make it about an affair.
Yep.
I think there was far more of a power move on his part than we give credit to. And just think about then being Bathsheba becoming his wife. Like, what if you didn't want that whole situation to happen and you never wanted a pregnancy? And wow, what a major distressing way to enter into a marriage,
What if
right?
she loved Uriah?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
What if he appears to be a very noble, wonderful guy from the little bit
Mm-hmm.
we know about him? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, he was very loyal to David and to the
High
army and all
integrity.
that. Yeah,
Yeah.
she might have loved her husband, and I do say that in the book because, like you, I've read some people who really try to throw Bathsheba under the bus, and
Nope.
that she's
Nope.
a Jezebel and that she shouldn't have
Nope.
been bathing, and that's what they did back then.
That's right. That's right. It
And,
wasn't her fault. We're not
yeah,
going to blame the victim.
exactly. And I know this is a little sidebar, but we do that because as the church, we don't want to blame the male leader. We
Mm.
don't want to place the burden on him that he should have been the one to not even consider that. Women did not have a voice. They were property. That's it. They to
Mm-hmm.
procreate, to make, and so I'm with you. I don't believe that Bathsheba had a say in this. And so when I use the word affair, I guess I'm you know using that so that people will understand what it was today, but we don't know that that she wanted this, that
Right.
she would have even had a choice.
We don't. We don't. And here's God's grace. She has another son. The child by that initial relationship dies. So there's a great, great consequence. And then she has another child, and his name is Solomon. And it just turns out that he's pretty important to the story of God's people. And something amazing comes out of that. Now, that's a story we don't have to talk about because he ended up with a lot more wives than his father had. And
Yes.
that's another journey. Okay, there's one more biblical story. And I just want to say to our listener and viewers, this book is really, really well done. There's so many takeaways. There's so many practicalities that come out of this. And it's the stories you've read your entire life. And maybe, just maybe, you're going to read them and see something fresh that you've never seen before in Laura's book. And I want to encourage you to do that. Take a fresh look at all these familiar stories. So the last story I want to talk about is just Jesus. I believe he did have half siblings.
Me too.
Half siblings? Yes, moms. Yeah, half siblings, step siblings, however you want to think of them. And what do we know about that story? And, Jesus and how he responded to them. Are there any takeaways for us there?
Yeah, this can be a little bit of a touchy subject because again, there are certain denominations that teach that Jesus did not have siblings.
Mm-hmm.
But we see that James is written as the brother of Jesus, and
Mm-hmm.
so and there are other parts where we read that he had brothers and sisters after after Jesus is born. Mary and Joseph have more children,
Correct.
so this
Correct.
would be his half siblings. What I found astounding as I was writing this, and again, I've been a Christian 43 years. It's not like any of this was like, I never heard it before, but it was so deep this time as I was writing about it, just how much they shunned him or
Hmm.
ridiculed him or backed away from him or mocked him until the resurrection. we do not see, first of all, at the foot of the cross, do we see any family members but Mary, his mother?
Nobody.
Now,
Yeah.
we're pretty sure dad's dead at this time. The last time we see Joseph, stepdad
Yeah.
Joseph, is at 12 years old. We
Right.
don't hear anything about Joseph again after that. So most scholars would agree that Joseph died. The foot of the cross, here we are. We got Mary Magdalene, we got
Mm-hmm.
Jesus's mother, we got John, the
Yep.
youngest disciple. We got nobody else.
Nope. No half brothers.
No half
Nobody's
brothers.
nobody's fighting for him or
No.
supporting him. Mm-mm.
And think about that for a minute. I mean, to the point
Hmm.
that Jesus has to give his mother to John.
Hmm.
Back in
Hmm.
that day, if you were the son, you would have had to give your mother's care over to someone, because that's why women had multiple husbands, is
Mm-hmm.
because if their husband died or divorced them, they would have no way of earning a
Yeah.
living. They
Yeah.
either
They had no
became a
standing in the
prostitute.
community.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, their community either had to take care of them or they'd go back to their family of origin. But Jesus from the cross has to say, John, this is your mother. Mother, this is your son. He gives her over to John, the youngest, the baby disciple,
Yeah.
so that his
Wow.
mother is cared for.
Mm-hmm. Hmm.
Now, if he had half brothers and sisters that he thought were going to do that, why would he have to give her to John?
Right. Wow.
So it's things like that I had never thought of before
Mm.
until
Jesus makes a statement at one point that he's come to separate fathers from children and mothers, and his point is, if you follow me, it's going to come with a cost, and for some of you, that means people aren't going to like you. He probably said that out of personal experience, having
absolutely.
felt that rejection from his siblings. And again, to your point, that they had removed themselves so far from him and from Mary, who still believed and knew who he was, that he couldn't even call on them to help care for his mother.
Yes. And
Mm.
and that is profound. When you understand what happens to a woman in that day when they don't have a male covering, you understand what danger she was in.
Yes.
And I mean, Jesus was 33, Mary was around 15,
Mm-hmm.
when she had Jesus. So, I mean, she's getting up in years. In that day,
Mm-hmm.
obviously we wouldn't view that as old today, but in that day, that was she needed somebody to make sure she wasn't going to starve to death
Yeah.
and or be abused or made a slave or something. And so the fact that Jesus is so conscientious about his own family members,
Mm-hmm.
that he makes a provision even while he's barely able to breathe on the cross. I mean, and one of the things I try to help, again, usually stepmoms, when I say to them, tell me what emotions you're feeling. I'm feeling rejected. I'm feeling like an outsider. I'm feeling like I don't matter. They go through the list of the emotions they're feeling. And I say, tell me which of those emotions Jesus didn't experience.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you see every single one of those, the mocking, the rejection, Jesus experienced every one of those things. And so that should give us comfort that if we have believed on Jesus and the Holy Spirit now lives within us, we can have the mind of Christ. We can think exactly the same way that Jesus did when he was experiencing all of that, even from his half siblings.
And we can know that he can sympathize, deeply feel with us the
Yes.
struggles and the heartaches that we feel in life. That sometimes we think God just can't understand all that or relate to it or draw near to us, and it's the exact opposite.
It really is. It's when we look at it that way, and that again is my prayer for this, is that as people read this and they think about it in the context of their stepfamily. Just today, I got a message. I've been in my stepkids' lives for 15 years, And when they post pictures on Facebook, they don't include any of my kids. They don't include any of their half siblings. They don't even mention us. It's like it's like we don't even exist. God understands. I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I know why kids do that. I know why they feel that way. But let's stop for a minute and think about, I serve a God, I love a God that knows what it is to be rejected by the step siblings, the step family. That will give me hope and insight that if he learned how to work with that and cope with that and forgive that, he can give me the ability to do that too. Do I want it? Do I want the mind of Christ? Because, ruminating in this rejection and this anger and this frustration feels good for a season.
It does feel good, doesn't it? Sometimes we'd prefer that over finding a way above and through it.
I'm not saying pretend you don't have the emotions or feelings. I hope as the body of Christ, we're getting better and better at saying, no, it's you. Those are real emotions. Those are real feelings. Right. You're not supposed to pretend that you don't have them. Now, what are you going to do with them?
Laura, thank you so much for writing this book. I appreciate you listening to the Spirit. Keep reminding, keep nudging, keep moving you forward. Thank you for being obedient to that. It's a great contribution. I'm so excited to be able to share it with our listeners today.
Well, I'm so honored that you love the book and that you're promoting it and that other people, it wasn't an easy book to get published because it's so outside the box. And so that's part of why I delayed for a while, because it just felt like nobody wanted it. And I thought, God, you're going to have to do this because the normal avenues that I use are not happening. So so that's my prayer. It's just that it'll reach the people that God wants it to reach.
Again, thank you for your persistence. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
To learn more about Laura, check the show notes. We got a link to her ministry. And don't forget to visit summitOnStepFamilies.com to learn more about our upcoming summit for ministry leaders. If you can't attend, tell a pastor or a leader at your church about it. Hopefully they can. Okay, next time, I'm talking with pastor and author Blake Hudspeth about his experience growing up in a blended family and the little booklet that he wrote called Dear Frankenstein, Hope for Pieced Together Families. Doesn't that sound like fun? That's next time on Family Life Blended. I'm Ron Deal. Thanks for listening or watching, and thank you to our production team and donors who make this podcast possible. Family Life Blended is part of the Family Life Podcast Network, helping you pursue the relationships that matter most.